Wampum are cylindrically shaped beads that are either purple or white that are made from the whelk shell or the quahog or quahog shell. This is a kind of an asymmetrical, thick clam shell, and you can see the colors inside. And those beads can be strung together to be used in ceremonies, and we still do use them in ceremonies, or to help send messages, or they can be woven together in what people call belts. And these are belts, and there are many, many different kinds that are red. This is a record of our history and important events and treaties. And what we would do is notice which of our people had good memories, and we would train them to memorize the speeches that would go with each belt and ask them to recite those from time to time. Some people call this the Hiawatha belt. It has nothing to do with Longfellow's Hiawatha. Some people call this the Confederacy belt. And this one is a replica of a 2,000-year-old belt. And if I were to tell you this whole story, it would take about 4 to 10 days to tell you the whole story. But just briefly, just to summarize a bit, if you look at it this way, going from east to west, it talks about how 2,000 years ago, the peacemaker came to us with a message of peace and unity, and he helped to unify the Kanien'kehá:ka, or the Mohawk Nation, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, and the Seneca nations into a peace confederacy, into a United Nations based on trying to settle our differences by talking instead of by fighting. And you'll notice that these nations are connected by a white road of peace that extends to the east and west as an invitation to other nations to also, if they're looking for that kind of peace and harmony, to symbolically follow that road back to the great tree of peace, where they can find protection and sanctuary if they agree to settle their differences in a logical way rather than in a warring way. So that's just a tiny, tiny part of that story.
And actually in the history of the Haudenosaunee tribe did join as the 6th tribe. The Tuscarora came on into the Confederacy in
the 1700s, yes. So when you hear the terms 5 nations, which it's referring to these 5 nations, when you hear 6 nations, it's referring to these 5 nations plus the Tuscarora, who came up from the Carolinas in the 1700s. When you hear Iroquois Confederacy, when you hear Haudenosaunee or Haudenosaunee, they're all different names for the same thing, for this peace confederacy. The Mohawk and the Oneida call this the Haudenosaunee. The Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca call it the Haudenosaunee, which means the people of the longhouse. We used to live in long, bark-covered houses. But again, that's just a little bit about this story. This is a replica of a 400-year-old treaty, a 400-year-old belt that reminds us of a treaty that was made more than 400 years ago. And this is called the Gaswenta, or the 2-row, because it has 2 purple rows here. And some people call this the grandfather of all treaties. And this was an agreement that was made between the Dutch and our people more than 400 years ago, because what happened was our people noticed that the Dutch were coming into our territories, and they were building houses and making gardens and bringing their families. And so our people had a meeting and said, well, it looks like they're going to stay for a while. You know, we need to talk about how we're going to live side by side, again, in peace and in harmony. How are we going to do this? And so it was agreed to make this belt. And this belt, the white beads, represent a river of life, because we all travel down a river of life, all of us. And on this river of life, there are two vessels. One is a ship and one is a canoe. And the ship belongs to the Europeans. And everything that makes them who they are, that defines who they are, is symbolically in that ship. Their people, their language, their songs, their dances, their history, their clothing, their food is in that ship. And the same thing with the canoe. Everything that defines who we are is in that canoe. Our people, our ceremonies, our stories, our language, everything is in that canoe. And the agreement that was made was that as we travel down this river of life, that we would not interfere in each other's ways, but rather, as you notice, the two rows are parallel. We would not climb into their ship and try to steer their ship, and they would not try to steer our canoe. That we would live as brothers, side by side as brothers, not as father and son, one above the other, but as brothers in mutual respect forever as we travel on this river of life. And there's 3 beads here representing peace, friendship, forever. And there was also the acknowledgement that we, traveling as brothers on the river of life, would all agree to take care of the water, because water is life, and we can't exist without it. No matter if you're in the ship or in the canoe, we all need that water for the plants to grow and for the animals to live and for the human beings to live. And so we all are supposed to share that responsibility of taking care of the water and everything in the environment. And this is supposed to stay in effect as long as the grass shall grow, as long as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, and as long as the rivers flow. And this morning I saw the sun rise in the east. The grass, after we got this little bit of rain today, is greening again, and the rivers, they're still flowing. So we are working very hard to try to remind people about this agreement.
Kind of bring the story to current times, because just a couple years ago, to bring some visibility to the issues expressed in the Belt, a number of members of the Haudenosaunee, and I think they were led by the Onondagas, as I remember, because they started in Syracuse, and they paddled the whole length of the Mohawk and the whole length of the Hudson, and they presented the story of the Belt at the United Nations, as I remember the story. And to bringing really this issue of remembrance of things promised to the environment, really to shed light on it at the international level. And that story was carried by a fair number of people. I want to say 40
and it wasn't,
or 50.
Yeah, it wasn't just Haudenosaunee people. It was Native people from as far away as Alaska, and they traveled in one row down the Mohawk and down the Hudson. And then there were non-Native people, the allies, that traveled in the other row, side by side, all that way. It started out at Syracuse, and there was this big celebration, the Capital District area, and then they headed down, as you mentioned, down the Hudson River to New York City. There was a march to the UN where they were all invited inside to come and speak. And what they did was ask the leaders of the world to find ways in which to honor all indigenous treaties all over the world. Find ways to honor those treaties and find ways to protect the water for everybody in the world. And yes, that just happened a couple of years ago. And in acknowledgement of the 400th anniversary, 400th birthday of the Goswenta. And there are still people who are continuing the tradition, talking to people wherever we have the opportunity to educate people about this, that we all have to share in this responsibility of finding ways to live in harmony and respect and acknowledge our relationship to the natural world and our dependency on clean water and clean air and Mother Earth. So it was a great example, a living, breathing example of how this could work, because they had to work and paddle together for an extended period of time to make this happen. And it was hundreds of people that were involved by the time they got to New York City.